What obstacles can I expect? Very few are the number who have entered religious life without having to overcome some obstacle. Perhaps not one so graphic as Jane Frances de Chantal's son throwing himself across the doorstep so that she would have to step over him to go to the convent. But painful difficulties arise nonetheless. The fact that a thing is difficult does not mean that it should not be done. Once you have thought it over, prayed about it, and reached a conclusion that you ought to do it, then you should act without further hesitation or delay. You must put your faith in God, for as St. Thomas says, they who enter religion trust not to stand on their own strength, but in the aid of the power of God. So, what are these obstacles? They generally fall into three categories: the world, the flesh, and the family. The first you hear is usually, "You're too young to know your own mind yet." "Wait a while and go to college first." Or, "Have a little taste of the world. You don't know what you're giving up." These are only worldly temptations to avoid a better life. What's so noble and uplifting about the world and society that we should taste it? Do they mean partake of immorality, get drunk, take drugs? Hardly. But if they mean simply have fun, then they are presupposing wrongly that there is no fun, entertainment, or pleasure in the convent. What an offering to give God the leavings when there is not much left of our life but a decrepit frame. And yet that's all that worldly people feel is fit for God, and that they are doing him a favor besides. Can you suppose that God would choose out of all the world the homeliest, the dullest, the most unfit to be his bride? He would be a poor judge to take for the holiest service the cast-offs of the world. Certainly a girl should take ample time to decide, but ample time does not mean to wait until there's no other prospect but to be an old maid. If God is calling you to the religious life, once that voice, as soon as you are certain of the calling, do not delay. The very fact that God calls you now means that he wants you now. If he wanted you later, the call would come then and not now. We might rather pity those who are not called to religious life. For though the world may grant them pleasures and honors, it can't give them or keep them from sorrow, affliction, and loss. Those in convents are saved much of the suffering that the world doles out to its followers. The second obstacle can be the candidate's own pride, vanity, love of ease, a lack of piety. Those who enter the convent are no different from other mortals. They have just surrendered themselves to his love. True, it will be difficult, but then he is there with us, urging us to learn of me, for I am meek and humble of heart. The kingdom of heaven suffereth violence, and the violent bear it away. The truth remains that God selects enough souls to carry on his work. Unfortunately, the lack of piety makes them deaf to the voice of God, and the love of finery and pleasure renders them blind. If you would see the world with eyes 20 years older, you would see misery and unhappiness in places where now you see but bliss. The major obstacle to most candidates, however, is their family. It is most natural to want our parents' blessing, and many parents, unfortunately, work on the sensitive nature of their children, appealing to their goodness and filial piety to keep them at home. If a girl is drawn to the love of Christ and prefers it to the love of a man, is it a kindness to thwart it? Rather, is it not ignorance or selfishness, or perhaps a mistaken idea of the girl's happiness? To such a girl, I would give this advice. If you are not yet old enough to leave your parents' custody, then pray and wait until you are of age. If you are of age, then recall the words of Christ. A man's enemies shall be they that are of his own household. He that loveth father and mother more than me is not worthy of me. Make up your mind whether you will obey God or man. Since this is a most important and difficult decision, I will call to your attention the advice of other competent and holy people. St. Teresa of Avila, who was no weakling, confessed that at the moment of leaving her parents, she suffered so much she felt only death could be worse. And yet, she left. The holy doctors of the Church unanimously teach that a parent's permission is not necessary to follow a religious vocation. Our Lord gave us his own example by remaining in the temple without Mary and Joseph's permission. Finally, there are the words of St. Jerome to Heliodorus on this very subject. He said, I invite you, make haste. You have made light of my entreaties. Perhaps you will listen to my reproaches. Effeminate soldier, what are you doing under the paternal roof? Even though your nephew entwined his arms around your neck, even though your mother wore with streaming hair to show you through her rent garments the breast that nurtured you, even though your father were to throw himself across the threshold of your house, step over the obstacle, and with unquivering eye rush to take your place beneath the standard of the cross. Lo, your sister presses you in her arms. Your attendants, your grandmother, your tutor exclaim, Wait a while until we are dead. Bury us before you go. Love of God and fear of hell easily breaks all chains. O soldier, all spangled with the flowers of Jesus Christ, blessed retreat where one enjoys familiarity with God. Brother dear, what are you doing in the world which is so far less than you? Do you fear hardship? What athlete was ever crowned without a struggle? It is my love for you, O brother, that has urged me to say these things to the end that on Judgment Day you may share the glory of those who now live amid the rigors of penance. There are many types of religious out there. How can I know the difference? The Catholic Church has three types of religious institutes and societies: religious institutes, secular institutes, and societies of apostolic life. An institute is every society approved by a legitimate ecclesiastical authority, the members of which tend to evangelical perfection, according to the laws proper to their society. By the profession of public vows, whether perpetual or temporary, the latter renewable after a lapse of a fixed time. As you can see, this is a very broad definition which covers all types of religious communities. The thing that all have in common is that they are recognized by ecclesiastical authority. They live a life in common in a community. They take vows. They practice poverty, chastity, and obedience. A secular institute has members who also take vows, try to perfect themselves in evangelical councils, and are also recognized by ecclesiastical authority, but they don't live in community. Hermits and anchorites, however, do not belong to this group, but to the religious institutes. A society of apostolic life is one whose members live privately, no community life, nor do they take vows, but they do try to practice poverty, chastity, and obedience more perfectly. When one talks about religious and religious life, you are usually referring to a religious institute. What is the difference in these religious institutes? Religious orders vary in three ways: rule, form, type, and apostolate. It's a mixture of these elements that make each order unique and give the church such diversity. What is a rule? A rule is a set of principles that govern a religious community. A large number of men and women can't live together in peace without some sort of rule to govern them. The Catholic Church, has accepted 4 different rules, and all religious orders use one of these rules as the basis for their own government. The rules are those of St. Benedict, St. Augustine, St. Basil, and St. Francis. How do the rules differ? St. Basil's rule influenced all religious orders of the Eastern Rite. St. Augustine's rule is probably the most general, giving guidelines for structure and duties. St. Benedict gave a very complete rule to guide his followers in monastic life. St. Francis's rule was based on gospel passages for his mendicant order. He, over time, made 3 variations of his original rule for the 3 different orders that he founded, but the basis is the same for all of them. The 3 different rules vary in how the community will be set up, the government of the house, the duties of its members, the prayer life, and how this affects the works that they do. What do you mean by the form or type of order? Religious institutes are divided primarily into 2 groups: clerical, those founded by priests and their formation only, and lay, all the others. These communities are then divided again depending upon the type of vows that their members take. Orders, they take solemn vows, and religious congregations, which take simple vows. For example, there are priestly orders of men who take solemn vows. They would be in a clerical order, while a man in a community that took solemn vows, but whose members would be brothers or priests, would be in a lay order. If the community took simple vows, it would be a lay congregation. Of course, there are no clerical orders for women religious, but there are communities that take solemn vows. And those that take simple vows, such as religious congregations. Women who take solemn vows are called nuns. Women who take simple vows are called sisters, although non-religious people use those terms interchangeably. What's the difference between a solemn vow and a simple vow? A solemn vow is one that the church recognizes as solemn. Otherwise, it's simple. Temporary vows are always simple. Solemn vows are always permanent. However, permanent vows can be either solemn or simple, depending upon the religious community. All monastic and mendicant orders take solemn vows. These are strictly cloistered communities and most semi-cloistered communities. Active communities of religious take simple vows. The difference between the vows is in how much it binds the bearer. Those under solemn vows can only be released by the Pope, while those under simple vows can be released from them by the bishop. What do you mean by cloistered, semi-cloistered, and active religious communities? A cloistered order, for example, the Carmelites, cut themselves off as much as possible from the world. Their members never or seldom leave their house. In some communities, when visitors come to visit, the nuns will receive them behind a grill or a heavy veil that covers their face. These orders are the strictest and the hardest. But because they have cut themselves off from the world, they can concentrate more on God and prayer. Their life is one of manual labor and prayer. Semi-cloistered communities separate themselves partially from the world, in that their members do not go out into the world to work, but bring what is needed into their houses. They will have schools or orphanages, etc., but inside their communities. Whatever apostolate they have takes place inside their community, with the people coming to them and leaving. For example, an example of this type would be the Dominicans or the Visitations, etc. An active religious community goes out into the world to accomplish their apostolate. Nursing sisters, religious who teach in parishes, social workers, visiting the poor and caring for the elderly in their own homes or in public institutions are members of active religious communities. The Sisters of Charity, the Sisters of St. Joseph, etc., are examples of this type of religions. My own community is one as well. In the early ages of the church, most all communities were monastic and therefore strictly cloistered. About the time of the Protestant Reformation, semi-cloistered communities began because of the need for education and that was something that could be done inside a religious house. About the time of the French Revolution, active communities began. St. Vincent de Paul saw the need for religious to go out and to help the poor and the needy. His sisters, the angels of the battlefield, cared for the wounded and the dying, started hospitals, and went anywhere that they were needed. Other religious orders followed, each with its own apostolate: orphanages, hospitals, home visitation, education, parochial schools, social service, etc. Today, the majority of religious communities are active religious institutes.